The reality is people want to move fast and people want to change fast and develop things fast. And that's just completely counter to how enterprise software was delivered 5, maybe 10 years ago. The faster you deliver something, the better you better be at understanding the risk and visualize it, understand it, and impact it. I was very lucky in that I started out with 4 engineers, probably finish out this year at about 30 people full-time on the security team. We are focused on the things that reduce harm to our customers and ensure that they can sort of have this foundational trust with us.
Hi, I'm Guy Pojarny, CEO and co-founder of Sneak, and you're listening to The Secure Developer, a podcast about security for developers, covering security tools and practices you can and should adopt into your development workflow. The Secure Developer is brought to you by Heavybit, a program dedicated to helping startups take their developer products to market. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on this show, or if you would like to suggest a topic for us to discuss, find us on Twitter at TheSecureDev. Welcome back, everybody, to the show The Secure Developer. Today we have on the show Geoff Belknapp, the Chief Security Officer for Slack. Geoff, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So there's a lot of conversations, a lot of questions that I sort of have when you think about security at Slack. I personally sort of at Sneak, we heavily rely on Slack for many things, and therefore heavily rely on the security of Slack.
Thanks for being a customer.
Yeah, always. Thanks for building the product. And with that, there's a lot of sort of, goodness and importance around the security of Slack as a whole. But specifically, the reason that we're sort of having this chat that I thought would be really interesting is that Slack is a very fast-growing company. It's definitely a company that moves quickly, that develops software quickly, that sort of ships software quickly. And what I'd love to sort of dig through as we have the conversation here is, chat a little bit around, how you build and how you handle security in such a sort of a tumultuous environment.
Great, yeah.
Can you sort of spend a couple of minutes just sort of telling us about your background and how you sort of got to Slack and what you do there?
I've been at Slack just about 2 years now. Before that, I was at Palantir for almost 6 years and worked on some really interesting, challenging data security problems there. And really, this is the second half of my career. So for about 15 years before that, I did a bunch of network engineering and telecommunications architecture work at startups and banks and telcos. So this is really the extension of me finding the magic and connecting two things together with cable and the lights blinking on either end. And that extending to, well, I guess that means bad things can happen as a result of lights blinking on either end of a cable as well. I think, my journey to Slack was really, in my career, I've really appreciated opportunities that allow me to have an impact. And certainly over the last few startups, the measure for whether that's going to be interesting to me is whether a good decision I make is just as impactful as a bad decision. And I think certainly people in security, you're not really, having an impact if a bad decision is also, contributes to a terrible outcome as well. And while nobody wants that, for somebody that really wants to have a big impact, I think you need to understand that it matters.
Yeah, no, very much. I think it's one of the areas that definitely contribute. So what was was there like an aha moment that made you, see the light or the dark? I don't know how you sort of refer to the security side of things.
No, I think it's something I've always been interested in, security in general. I think I was definitely one of those kids that wanted to be, I think first it was a pilot and then it was a cop or a firefighter or something like that. And I think as I grew up and matured, I was always very interested in the legal system and law and justice, and security sort of naturally played to those ideals. I think in the mid 90s when I was getting into telecommunications and was really the industry was just getting deregulated and this was taking off, the natural gravitation of somebody who's smart and likes engineering problems was, go work on that, go build the internet. And certainly I had the opportunity to work on some of the first cable internet deployments, and we built some of the first, pre-standard broadband internet networks. And that was a lot of fun. Sort of fast forward to that, nobody at the time in the 90s, nobody really thought you could abuse that. It was the time of Kevin Mitnick where, abusing a telecom network was, making free long distance phone calls and getting infamy from that. So now when the industry and telecommunications is really mature to a point where our entire world economy is really based on top of this, and not only is that how those economies are driven, but also how entire businesses are built on top of this sort of fabric that we've added to the world. And it's really interesting to be able to contribute to how do you manage risk and how do you make sure that you can enable technological change and economic innovation, but also do that in a way that manages the risk and make sure that we're enabling that change and not enabling something negative.
Yeah, for sure. Table stakes are definitely higher.
Yeah, for
now,
sure.
The game has gone up a few notches. So you joined Slack when? How long ago?
I think it was January 2016, so not quite 2 years yet.
Okay, cool. And were you? Can you tell us a little bit about like the evolution of the security team at Slack? I mean, we spoke to like Sean Gordon here from New Relic, who talked about being kind of the first security hire at 140 people. In Optimizely, it was maybe like a similar story. How what was Slack's kind of trajectory around sort of size and first security hires?
Yeah, I think so. When I joined Slack, I want to say we were about 300 people, which depending on sort of what kind of startup you are, that's a reasonable time to really focus on executive level leadership for security, and especially for Slack, as we try to really compete in the enterprise space that we're in with some really big names. It becomes a critical part of the business. And that was what was really interesting to me. I was very lucky in that I started out with 4 engineers, which is probably the biggest team that I've started with. Once or twice before this, when I've started security teams, it's usually 1 or 2 engineers that are on loan from some other team. And this was, Slack had already had 4 engineers that were full-time dedicated to security. So we've built from that in not quite 2 years to, we'll probably finish out this year at about 30 people full-time on the security team, which is a full-fledged part of the engineering organization at Slack. And the idea is that we are focused on the things that reduce harm to our customers and ensure that they can sort of have this foundational trust with us, because as you said, your whole business is built on this. I'm looking across at the engineer and I'm watching him use Slack on his phone, and it's both a thrilling and sobering thing when I ride Caltrain into work every day, and I look around the car that I'm sitting in and I see people using Slack all over the place. And for me, that's certainly the first time I've worked somewhere where it's ever present that people's lives and business and this influences how they do everything. So we focused on how do we ensure that we have that, like I said, foundational trust. We have our application or platform security team, we have our operational security teams, we have our teams that are focused on incident response and management, and then of course we have our teams that are focused on how do we handle risk and compliance, how do we de-risk the Slack environment, how do we make sure that customers can align whatever sort of compliance programs they have to what we're doing, all towards the end goal of making it so that if you're developing on the platform or if you're using the platform to run your business, you don't have to think about those things, right? So you can develop an app or build something that's built on top of the platform and understand that you can plug right into all these things that we've built. You can bring your Fortune 100 organization to Slack and understand that we've already provided all these touch points and mapped everything to your program. And so eventually you understand that any of the apps you pull out of the app directory are something that are suitable and make sense to use in your environment and are not just toys or fun shiny things to play with for your devs, that they're actually parts of your business.
So you came in and you said you had 4 engineers, and then you talked about security as part of the engineering team. So first of all, maybe let's sort of unpack that a little bit.
Okay.
It's not always a given that you consider security to be a part of the engineering team. Is that the way it's structured? Like security as a whole is a part of the engineering organization?
That's certainly the way it is now. I think when you start a security program and you invite somebody in to sort of be the leader of that security program, you're never really sure exactly where that's going to go. And I think, in fact, I just had coffee with someone this morning who's looking at, hey, we're almost at the same size Slack was when they started their security program. What do you recommend we do? And there's really no one common path that everybody can follow, other than say you start with generalists and you sort of set them to work on your highest priority problems and you build from there. So Slack, when we started the security team, I think we were part of the privacy and policy organization, which sort of flowed through the business side of the organization. Now I report directly to Cal Henderson, our CTO, and we're a full-fledged part of engineering and
Mm-hmm.
first-class citizen in engineering, which really, I think it helps people understand that security matters to Slack. And this I feel so sort of
Mm-hmm.
cliche saying, security is important to us and security really matters. But I think to some extent, like that's the only term I can use that describes like it matters. It matters deeply to me. It matters deeply to people at Slack. We do treat security in a first class way and make sure that the platform security teams or the application security teams are involved in reviewing new products that the product and the engineering teams are working on. They're involved in customer integration and customer engagement when we're talking about when we're talking to an enterprise customer who wants to bring their entire environment over to Slack. We're involved in that discussion and making sure that
Mm-hmm.
we understand their risk model and they understand how we address that. We're involved when it comes to talking to developers that might be developing an app or an integration for a customer or trying to build a business on top of the Slack platform, and helping them understand how to do that in the most secure way possible, how to make it the most impact, but also be able to offer products to our enterprise customers on top of the platform. So I think everywhere that we can possibly touch security in the organization, it's represented in a really positive way. And I think ultimately that should be your goal. If you really do take security seriously in your organization, and if you're building a startup or if you have an established organization, that's what you have to do, and you have to do that in a first class way.
I wonder if this type of perspective, which I totally relate to, right? I agree that one, security engineering. So to me, the choice of using the term and putting the team in engineering conveys. I don't know if I'm wrongfully reading into it. A few things. One is it seems to prioritize building security systems, right? Sort of building things that are a little bit more engineered to work well, as opposed to maybe like relying on sort of manual efforts or actions. So that's maybe one. Definitely an aspect of an engineering culture. The second is it talks about building security in versus bolting on, or whatever the sort of the cliche you want to choose there. But I wonder like how much of this is a post DevOps revolution startup, right? It's an environment in which the mandate of breaking down walls between different teams, of sharing responsibility, at least in sort of the development and ops world, kind of permeates into security. Well, if you go to an organization that has 10 years more more sort of lifespan than Slack, let alone 20, 30, 40, structure is not necessarily in that aspect of it. So I think not again all positive. Just sort of wondering a little bit out loud. Do you think this is like a prerogative of an early company, or can you sort of envision a 20-year-old company having kind of the security team being led from within the engineering organization?
I think to your point, I'm definitely the very fortunate beneficiary of being able to start a security program
Mm-hmm.
and have the ability to make some of these foundational changes to how we think about it culturally.
Mm-hmm.
I think and I think it really comes down to just that, right? How does your organization think about security culturally? How do they think about security? Are problems secrets? Is this are these things to discuss and analyze and really engineer solutions to, or are they things that you sort of bring up at your audit committee meeting and then never speak of again? Specifically to your question of can I see a 20-year-old established or older established organization managing security engineering? And I think the answer is, yeah, I can see that, but that organization would have to work a lot harder at it than I would.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm very fortunate in that I'm starting with a clean slate. There's always this really tempting, ability, certainly with people on Twitter, to go, well, what if this company had just done X, or why don't they just X? And it's a great example of like not understanding how complex some of these problems are and how
Yeah.
complex sort of large businesses are. But I think you've seen a lot of large organizations pivot recently. That you've seen leadership changes at Microsoft sort of wholesale shift that organization. You've seen places like IBM make dramatic changes to how they operate their environment. And I think it's an example of if some of these largest organizations in the world can make that change, then your organization can make that change too. It just has to be a high priority for that organization.
Sort of on that note a little bit, right, and talking a little bit about pace, right? So I would say that the premise of or like, the motivation, the reason that you would want to shift your organization as a whole or your security organization seems to fundamentally come down to pace, right? The internet is moving at an increasingly fast pace, and a business needs to catch up, right? You need to iterate, you need to ship stuff quickly, you need to try out ideas and fail in quickly, so you can kind of switch on and find the one that wins. So everything needs to be fast, and fast is a scary thing sometimes for security. So I guess on that note, let me dig a little bit into indeed that sort of speed element, right? That's one of my kind of curiosity points indeed. How do you see that, right? For at least from the outside, it seems like Slack is shipping stuff very quickly. What's your kind of philosophy, and kind of how does it come into practice around kind of balancing this speed of delivery?
The faster you deliver something, the better you better be at understanding the risk and controlling it. And if not just controlling it, being able to visualize it, understand it, and impact it, right? Be able to have some levers or some controls to adjust it. I think in Slack's case, just like everybody else is trying to be, they're either trying to play agile or actually be agile. I don't know if that's probably a terrible cliche, way to describe it, but like, the reality is people want to move fast and people want to change fast and develop things fast. Slack pushes, hundreds of, we could push, hundreds of changes a day that are constantly improving the product and the platform. And that's just completely counter to how enterprise software was delivered, 5, maybe 10 years ago. And certainly that's something we talk with our auditors and our customers about. But you can move at that speed, and you can do that even if it confounds the auditors and scares people that were more traditional risk managers. Because the reality is, your customers want that. They want you to go fast. They want it to be improved fast. The reason people are signing up for things that are SaaS products and subscription-based services is because their expectation is that the product is going to constantly improve. And certainly I think everyone, just like Slack, it wants to meet that. Well, that makes my job both very exciting and very stressful, in that I have to constantly be building a program and controls and visibility. If I just think about the tools that can tell us what's happening and alert us to if something's going wrong. It means we have to respond faster when we do find something that's gone wrong, or if we think something's sort of veering off in a direction that's less than safe. But it also means we have to have culturally the ability to flag problems inside the organization, to escalate those, to have discussions with comms or general counsel, or with your CEO or your CTO about what are these problems, and how do they impact the business, and what should we do? Do we change a high-level, top-level strategy? Is this a simple logistical change? But if you don't have the ability to both quickly surface, discuss, and make decisions, and then disseminate, an action plan inside your organization, I mean, all those things contribute deeply to whether you are secure or not, and whether your business is going to survive.
So how does that play out in reality? So I share the concepts, right? You want to be able to communicate. You want to talk about risk, without without sort of some zero tolerance mindset. Like sometimes you need to move it. How does that manifest? Like, can you share some best practices, some tools, or maybe it's principles that you apply that that we can adopt elsewhere as well in kind of the daily life?
I think a great example here of how this manifests and how to measure whether this is working well in your organization is if you're at a maturity phase where you can have a bug bounty. This is a great sort of test for is your organization mature in terms of how it handles risk and how it responds to things? And B, are you mature enough that you can accept, random people on the internet telling you how bad your product is, other than your customers? I think it's really a big step. So for us, we have a bug bounty. I was very lucky in that I walked in, and when I walked to the door, Slack had already established this. But a bug bounty is really something that from the outside, seems like an interesting idea and is valuable, but it really, to do it well, becomes part of the fabric of your sort of your technical and your business culture. You're putting something out there where you tell people, please find flaws in my product, tell me about them, and we will fix and compensate you for that trouble. And that seems really straightforward, but what that means is we get submissions all day long from the bug bounty program, and we scrutinize each of those, and we look at them, all through a very serious eye, and we triage those, and then we have an internal discussion with the team that looks at that, and they make a decision about, is this really a problem or not? Do we need more information? And then, the stuff nobody ever sees, kicks into work. And there's a whole bunch of stuff where, we file a ticket, we might go over to that product team or the product management team and try to understand, this is a problem or that we've confirmed this is a problem, what priority is this? How fast do we think this needs to be fixed? Is this something that we think customer data is at risk immediately? Do we need to do all hands on deck and fix this? Is this something that can just go into the next, release cycle? And that's a hard discussion to have if you don't have a strong engineering, a strong security culture, because people generally don't like to fix bugs. People don't like to fix bugs. I'm sure nobody listening to this podcast hates to fix bugs, but everybody else would rather
includes the listeners.
Yeah. I think everybody else would sort of like to wait till next quarter or maybe the next release or something else that's going to make money. So it's very easy to see the friction between, the need to address risk and the need to sort of drive the business forward. And, your security program has to act in a credible way to represent that risk to the business and sort of get priority on that. So now we've established that, there's priority there, and, now we get down to fixing it, confirming it. And then you have to go out and tell that researcher, like, you know what, you were right. That's a bug. We fixed it. Can you please confirm whether it's fixed? And then you're giving that researcher permission. Like, if you want to go tell people about this bug, if you're going to write a blog post or post it on Twitter, whatever it is, you have our permission. And there are some reasonable constraints on that, but at the end of the day, you're agreeing as part of this sort of social contract that they can tell people about this flaw that they found. And you have to take a moment and sort of let that settle in, that you're agreeing to let someone tell other people about something you fucked up. Like, I don't know any other industry. I think there are very few industries where they're willing to sort of let people tell them what they're doing wrong, take that feedback very seriously, fix it, and then let people tell other people about that, right? Could you imagine being in a relationship where somebody like posts all your flaws online? Well, maybe there are relationships like that, and I'm just old-fashioned.
They do exist, yeah. I think the bug bounties are an amazing thing. We have one at Sneak. From an early age, I see them as such a massive boon and advantage. It's you basically get a bunch of auditors of varying skills going off and testing and finding issues, and whatever it is that you pay them, it's probably nowhere near as much as you would have paid hiring those auditors in. And we love those audits, and even if people sort of submit the wrong thing, we send them swag. We send them some stickers, some magic ones that we have, and definitely successful. I like the idea. I'd never really considered it that way. I like the idea of maybe thinking about bug bounties as the transparency vehicle. I think when DevOps happened, a lot of the advantage, right? A lot of the revolution maybe came from people acknowledging failure, right? Embracing failure, internally talking about the blameless postmortems and things like that, but even externally, right? Somebody getting up on stage and talking about this massive outage they have and how they, screwed up kind of throughout multiple times, and how they handled it and how they learned from it, right? And how they're doing it better today. Didn't really think security, it's risky. It's scary to do this. It's really scary to stand up on stage and describe your existing security process, because you feel like everybody's going to find the gaps. And it definitely is scary to come up and talk about security mistakes that you've done. But bug bounties are kind of the safe way to do it, because it was a mistake. Somebody found it, but it wasn't a breach.
Yeah, I think it's a safe way to, for organizations to dip their toes in the waters of transparency. And I think the reality is we're not headed towards a future where there's less transparency, right? So I'm looking at a future where, people need to have more information, and consumers need more information about, what the privacy impacts of your products are, what security features you have. I'd love to see an environment we were operating in where there was like an Energy Star logo, or just like you have nutrition facts on the side of the cereal box, so people can sort of evaluate, one SaaS provider versus another and go, oh, well, this one's got, worse SSL or TLS certificates than this one, or this one, handles my data in a different way. we really like we were going to move towards a time like that, and where maybe 5 years ago you could try to sue somebody into not presenting about your product at Black Hat or DEF CON, or writing a blog post. The reality is like you can't, and going that way and trying to keep a lid on how you're approaching these things, and how slow or fast you're fixing them is the wrong way to go. The right way to go is treat these things, give them the right priority, do a consistent job of addressing them, even if you're not fixing it as fast as someone else might like you to. As long as you're fixing it and you're doing it in a transparent way, I think what companies, especially startups, are starting to figure out is having a track record of transparently and consistently addressing these kind of security problems in general lends you towards a place where you're improving the brand, you're improving the trust you have with your customers, your prospective customers. And I think there's certainly, without getting too far into the weeds of the news, you're looking at breaches and other things happen in a way that, if you're dealing with companies that historically have not been transparent and have not been consistent in how they handle these things, the fallout from those things is going to be much more dramatic than if people know that you've been doing the right thing, or making an honest attempt at taking security seriously all along. It makes it much less like a TV trope to just say you're taking security seriously when you're in front of Congress.
No, but once again, it's sort of the high table stakes there. The so let's sort of maybe continue down this line of kind of laying blame. So I remember, I'm not sure if I'm remembering my facts correctly, but I think maybe it was when Cloudbleed happens, or when one of the Slack team, security team, sent flowers, or some box of chocolates, or was the other way around. There was some I seem to recall some showing some love from the sort of Slack security team to another breach, or vice versa. I think these, while I don't remember the details, these types of occasions stick to mind because they're so unusual in the security chatter. Typically, we just had a massive breach at Equifax. We've had massive ones before, maybe not quite that size. But definitely each time one of those happens, when there's some big breach, some big data leak, the finger pointing begins, right? It's all about laying blame, and a part of it is washing your hands, so it's not my fault. A part of it is glee, maybe just sort of being gloating, for somebody else's failure. And I find we, from kind of a perspective of maybe somebody providing security tools and talking about reducing risk, and I suspect you share this as well, that it's really hard to talk about security in a positive tone, right? To educate for security, to educate about reducing risk without having the narrative be about hyping up the risk, right? About having this fear-induced, blame-induced environments. If you don't do this, you're going to lose your job. If you don't do this, you're going to be breached. The world will come to an end. How do we? What are your thoughts on this? How do we kind of advance on that path?
I think the answer is definitely more cake. So we sent.
That's always good.
I think what you're thinking of is, we sent Atlassian some cake or some cookies recently at the launch of their product. I think in the past we've also sent cake or pizza when friends are having a bad day, because the reality is, even though we're all in this market and we're competing against each other, whether it be Microsoft or Atlassian or anyone else, we all rise and fall together, right? So the tide comes in and out. We all go up and down together. A breach at one cloud provider is not a cause for joyous celebration. It's a time for us to all reflect on that could have been us, and what are we doing to make sure that doesn't happen. And quite frankly, for people in my position and a lot of people on my team, do those guys need any help, right? Is there anything that we can do to help them out? Do they, if there's any information that we have, either whether it be threat intelligence or smart people that are working on a problem, quite frankly, we're often very ready to help, and I've seen that go both ways. People have reached out and offered assistance across the community, and that's one of the parts about the community I really like. The alternative to that is we also live in an environment where people are very ready to pitch their product on top of whatever this latest breach is. I think because security is very hard to sort of understand and grasp the ROI of, and understand when you should be buying versus building and what you should be buying, And there are a ton of things to buy. There's something like 1,700 different startups being covered by, by different analysts right now. All of them are in this market trying to sell a security relevant product. And, they all, there's a ton of money floating around. They all need an opportunity to market. So anytime there seems to be some sort of news about security, I get a flood of emails, as it is everybody else, I think, in the industry, about how vendor X's product would have stopped this. And it's both infuriating and it's unhelpful to the industry as a whole, because that's not what we're here to do. Quite frankly, I don't think I've ever received an email where that was true, that vendor X's product would have prevented whatever I just read about in the news. But it sort of makes it harder for our industry and our discipline and our engineering practice to be better recognized, because there's sort of this ambulance chasing. I think eventually, between M&A and just sort of the natural momentum of the market, that will settle down and this will make sense. I think it's going to take longer, and people will realize that security, cybersecurity, risk management, information security, whatever you want to call it, has to become a core part of how you operate a business. And the thing you should be spending most of your time on when you're deciding what to buy or what to build is, what are the most high priority things for your business? What's strategic? What's important? What are you spending the most amount of time on in terms of problems to solve? And then maybe those are the things to spend your money on. But otherwise, you should be, like we talked about before, you really should be building things that are directly going to enable your business to achieve its strategic outcomes. And if you're not focused on those things because you're distracted by something else that's taking all your time, that's a great thing to spend money on, to make go away, either with people or technology. But everything else you should be focused on giving you the best visibility, giving you the best ability to control or influence those outcomes.
So I definitely kind of relate to the vision, right? Or sort of this, the goal, shall we say, maybe like I'm a tiny bit more pessimistic around, whether consolidation of the security market would lead us there. I feel like there's more, salesmanship or sort of fear mongering has kind of not really gone away from our culture at any point in time. But I do think that it's something that if we don't do anything about it, definitely is going to get worse, and we need to work on it, right? We need to push for it and try to incentivize it. I guess maybe that's, we kind of have time for sort of one more sort of these topics of conversations. How do you see incentives in this world, right? Because you talk about the counter example of chasing an ambulance, chasing a hack, but how do you celebrate security success? How do you reward good behavior, good achievements in security?
I think the way I think about incentives is transparency helps a lot here. The economic incentives have really been misaligned for security in a long time, in that if you look at breaches historically, and I think if you look at the current breach du jour everyone's talking about, it's probably too early to tell for that one. But if you look at the numbers historically, you'll find that the cost of being breached is very short term. So especially if you're a public company, you'll find that your stock price might take a hit, at least temporarily. But the reality is, like, that will come back and people will buy their diapers or hammers or whatever it is that you sell, and things will stabilize again. And right now, the economic incentive is to scare people into buying your thing or spending money in a certain place, and it's not directly aligned with actually making things better, because people, by and large, have not spent much time studying and putting information out in a broad way about what is better and what does it take to make things better. I think there are people, somebody I'm a big fan of, Bob Lord, who talks about this in the sense of, so we all know we should eat less and exercise more. Certainly, I'm well aware of that fact personally, but occasionally you have to skip a day. You don't go to the gym, or you skip a leg day, or whatever it is, and that's fine. But you understand that there are consequences with that, and you understand that making different choices about what you eat, or having a cheat day, or whatever it is different than deciding, well, I know I'm supposed to eat less and exercise more, but I really like eating a full sheet cake and drinking an entire bottle of whiskey every day. And while that sounds wonderful, you can't sustain that on a daily basis. Something bad is going to happen. The chances are probably more bad things than wonderful. So you have to sort of manage risk in a way that leads you down a path of, like, you're constantly improving. And that's not any fun. It is fun to buy the brand new APT, dark web, threat intelligence, machine learned, something or other. And the thing that you can, wrap yourself in this comfortable blanket of like, oh, good. Now all the threats will be found by whatever this thing is. But the reality is, like, the thing that makes you safer every day are the really boring things, right? Managing inventory management, managing your risk, understanding where your risk is, understanding
security hygiene. Right?
Yeah, understanding the hygiene. And, while it's easy to say, oh, if you just keep up to date on your patches, then you'll be fine. Well, in a complex environment, understanding what is there to be patched, what the current patch state of it is, how many machines do you actually own, or VMs are you actually running at any given time, that's a really complex problem. And it has a straightforward solution. It is easy to get distracted by buying that magical silver bullet versus doing that hard hygiene work or that hard sort of self-care work. So I think, more transparency lends to, putting the incentives in the right place, because if you're being transparent, if you had to disclose sort of what your security status was, your hygiene was as part of your quarterly filings, or if the market was incentivized in a way where you had to do, like we talked about, these nutrition facts kind of label on the side of your product, you would be incentivized to make sure that you're constantly making improvements in these areas, and you'd be less excited about buying silver bullets and more focused on, making steady improvements and listening to what your consumers want, or giving, consumers what you think they need, versus just sort of trying to defend yourself against an inevitable lawsuit.
Definitely a complicated equation to have, and it's indeed fun. It's fun to build these sort of advanced APT machine learning dark web thingy as well.
Yeah, and I think, and to be honest, like, I think there is a need for some of these, and many of them are valuable.
There's no silver bullet. Yeah.
Having the best algorithm is not going to solve any problems for you if you aren't doing any of these basic hygiene things. And it's not that the hygiene things are easy. It's just that they, if you look at sort of Maslow's hierarchy of need applied to security, you need to address some of these things first before you're spending time on self-actualization or making sentient AI.
So this was fascinating. I have all sorts of other questions for you, but I think we're sort of out of time. So before we let go, I'll ask you a question I ask all of my guests here. If there was sort of one tip, one advice, one sort of maybe the other way around, some pet peeve that you have about people not doing, that could help, a security team, a development team, a company level up their level of security. What's your tip?
I think I was just ranting about this on Twitter, which honestly I have to be more specific about. But I think the best tip I have is, if you only have one place to focus on people. Focus on the really hard, non-instantly gratifying thing of like, invest in your people, invest in hiring great people, invest in giving the people that you have hired the things that they need. You give them, listen to them, give them your time, give them your support, your trust, your respect, and they're going to do great things for you. And, putting great people on your team is going to be way better than, spending double or triple that amount of actual hard money into some security product, right? In fact, some of the security products that we have that are the best are the least expensive things we would spend money on. And I think, spending, money, but also just investing time in your people is the best thing you can do. And it's also, quite frankly, the least expensive, easiest thing you can do.
Yeah, excellent tip. Definitely, if you invest in people, I think the rest will come. You will choose the right tools. You would build the right practices. Fully agreed. Well, this was super great conversation. Thanks a lot for coming. If people want to kind of keep up with your sort of inputs, want to follow on Twitter or sort of contact you some other way, can you sort of share how you can find you?
You can follow me on Twitter, which is probably a terrible idea if you want to have a irrational conversation, but I'm at Geoff Belknapp on Twitter. I don't know, come work at Slack. That's the easiest way to spend a bunch of time with me.
That works.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot, Geoff, for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. It was super fun.
And thanks for everybody that tuned in, and join us for the next one. Thanks.
That's all we have time for today. If you'd like to come on as a guest on this show, or want us to cover a specific topic, find us on Twitter @TheSecureDev. To learn more about Heavybit, browse to heavybit.com. You can find this podcast and many other great ones, as well as over 100 videos about building developer tooling companies, given by top experts in the field.